Today's episode is sponsored by QAD, a provider of next-generation manufacturing and supply chain solutions in the cloud, enabling adaptive enterprises around the world. Visit them at QAD.com.
Aerospace and defense manufacturing.
Machines and automation.
Additive manufacturing.
Smart manufacturing.
The global manufacturing economy.
Welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals, powered by SME. From the design screen to the shop floor to final assembly, we drive the conversation about making manufacturing smarter by connecting people who are passionate about manufacturing.
Hello and welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals. I'm David Muller, Senior Editor at SME Media and your host. Today we're joined by Terry Onika, Director of Automotive for QAD. QAD specializes in ERP software, which many of our listeners know stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. The company was founded in 1979 with a few local customers in Santa Barbara, and today has grown to serve customers across more than 100 countries in the world. Now, as Director of Automotive for QAD, Terry is responsible for global marketing activities, so strategy and positioning, product and offering, people and knowledge, and field and sales marketing support for the automotive vertical. She also helps customers work toward earning preferred supplier status, and Terry is very involved with the development and global adoption of supply chain industry standards and best practices. Thanks for joining us, Terry. We're glad to have you here. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So I want to start, obviously you're director for automotive at QAD. Can you maybe start by giving our listeners a little understanding of that segment of manufacturing, what you deal with there?
Sure. So in the automotive vertical, I work with our customers. We are mostly in the automotive supply chain tiers. So our customers are not typically the OEMs, the Fords, the Volkswagens, Stellantis, GMs, Toyotas of the world. They're all of their suppliers. So that's where we are in. So all of our customers are making parts that eventually go into the vehicle. I'm not sure if some of your listeners may know, but we also always talk about automotive in tiers, with tier 1 directly supporting the assembly plant. Tiers can go down to 22 like they do in the semiconductor, or you could have a 4-tier supply chain. At the bottom is typically raw material. In between is typically parts. And at the tier 1 level, they're shipping something, typically a major component or system, into the OEM. So that's a little bit about the customers that I work with. As a part of that role, QAD allows me to spend about 25% of my time involved in industry standards. So I participate in AIAG, the Automotive Industry Action Group here in North America, and ODET, which is in Europe. And so my specialty is providing and working with developing supply chain standards. I know a lot of your listeners are in the manufacturing environment, but I'm sure they really appreciate getting those parts in on time and be able to ship out to the customers. So I do that. And then also, what I do as a result of my work in the industry is then I bring that back into our software and into our products and make sure that our customers are able to meet the best practices and the compliance standards that are so rampant in the automotive industry. Lots of requirements to be an automotive supplier. So that's a little bit about what I do at QAD.
So a couple of things there. I mean, one of the things I've been hearing about in the supply chain is standards are a really big thing. I mean, there's really quite a bit of effort there. I mean, I guess maybe we'll start with that part of the question. Is that something that's become more important and more talked about lately, or has it always been the case and it's just kind of been an ongoing battle, I guess, to better standardize some of these things?
Yeah, the automotive industry, because we want to reduce cost, is always looking to reduce variations. And so that's why we have so many standards, whether it's in quality with IATF 16949 or MMOGLE, which is the Materials Management Operations Guideline Logistics Evaluation. It's the supply chain equivalent that we see for IATF on the quality side. Those, because they're used in the industry and they're so important, they are always getting updated. So, for instance, like MMOGLE, which I work a lot on, is in now its 6th version, and I think it's going on 21 years old. Same with the IATF standards or the quality standards. They just continue to develop because quality, cost, and delivery are really important. But there's always new things coming on board as well, too. There's different initiatives like sustainability. You wouldn't have heard about that maybe even 10 years ago, but now there's work groups that look at sustainability as well. So there's always new things coming, a lot with the batteries that are going to be in the vehicle, standards coming out in that area. But just this morning I also have a podcast. We were talking about doing an EDI survey, and EDI has been around at least 30, 35 years now in the automotive industry. But as an industry association, we're looking at, is it time to make some changes to EDI? There's some interesting technology out there. So we're going to be doing a survey on EDI to find out what's the status and, do people want to change it, or do they want to start maybe trying some other things? So standards just keep on evolving. And I think new standards keep on coming up. But I think most people like them because it does try to reduce the variation and also give some guidance. One of the things that I can say, I've participated since the 1990s in the standards, and they continue, like I said, to grow. And suppliers, while they sometimes complain, well, the standard, sometimes OEM tweaks it and has their own little modification to it. And I would agree that happens. But being a part of AIAG, I think without the organization, we probably have about 30 to 40% commonality, but with standards organizations, I think we really do achieve more like 80%. So I think it's much better to have these, even though sometimes suppliers and legitimately complain that there's some tweaks that some of the OEMs might do with the standards. Yeah, it makes sense.
I want to take a step back and talk a little bit more about the sector, the automotive sector as a whole. That's seemed to be just kind of in a state of flux lately, especially with the rise of EVs. I mean, and there's how different leading automotive producing countries are approaching EVs and how they're building them, how they're buying them. How big of an effect has the evolution of electric vehicles had on the automotive sector from your vantage point?
It's had a big change, and we're evolving through that. And you can even see almost, even until recently, if you would have looked back even 2 years ago, there was so many new entrants and new startups coming in. But as money started to tighten and competition started to tighten, we starting to see a lot of slowdown in that area in some of the sectors of the EV. So we see that going on. The other thing I think in the EV space that is really challenging right now as we transition from the internal combustion engine to the electric vehicles is the impact that's having on demand. So if you look at here in North America and in Europe, we see it slowing. I don't think it's going to go away. I no way think that's going to happen, but we see it slowing right now. In China, you see it taking off. It's doing very well in China. But in Europe and North America, it's kind of wreaking havoc in manufacturing and supply chain because that demand that was supposed to go up is going down. And so you can imagine if you were going to ship on a new platform or start production for a new platform, a couple of years ago, now that OEM may be pushing that back. So that's really challenging. And just the demand fluctuation. Now, we've always had demand variability. Suppliers will always say, it's always so volatile, the schedule. But right now, there has been some decline. And so to me, what's worrisome is about the overall impact to the supply chain since it's so fragile. I often worry about, as we switch from the internal combustion engine to the electric vehicle, those lower tier suppliers that may be completely reliant on the internal combustion engine, if you don't know about them and they start to lose business, could we see some disruptions in the future because we have to dig so deep in the supply chain sometime to find these suppliers? So right now, I think it's a little bit pessimistic, but I think people are waiting till after the elections. And again, I do believe it's going to take back off again. But I think some things are just going to be a little bit delayed than what they were expected to say a couple of years ago.
It seems too. I mean, like there was going to be this huge shift. The automakers, the major automakers were saying, we're going to be all EV by 2030 or whatever. And they have one of the aspects of this that I think would be interesting. In the supply chain area, and I think maybe you're alluding to this. Just there's completely different parts, obviously, that these. If you did, and we've learned that it seems like that we're not making a huge shift like as rapidly as maybe some had thought. But I mean, still, like if you do a major shift, I mean, aside from like the plants and having to retool to make EVs and all that, there's just different parts that go into EVs than ICE vehicles, like you had mentioned. I mean, that's how big of an aspect, I guess, of that are some suppliers concerned about?
Yeah, if you look at a lot of the traditional pieces of it, it's still going to be the same. We're going to still need doors and instrument panels and things like that. So it's really the powertrain that's going to change a lot, where we're going to lose some suppliers in that transition. But if you listen to a lot of the OEMs, they don't project. I was at something not too long ago with General Motors, and somebody in the audience asked how long do they think the internal combustion engine will be around, and he said it's going to be here for a while, but the volumes are going to get lower. And so what I always worry about is that tipping point. What does that do to the supply base? And I think right now, I'm not sure if we really know. And I always wonder how much the OEMs and even tier one suppliers are really trying to dig in the chain, because they can be so deep, like I'd mentioned earlier. They can be 22 tiers, like with semiconductors, or, it can be 4 tiers. But still, the only way you can get to the supplier is 1 tier at a time. And so it takes a lot of collaboration and work to really figure out who the actors are throughout the whole supply chain. And you look at sustainability right now, there's a similar issue. We have to make sure with the Scope 3 emissions that we can get down the supply chain and make sure everybody's, going to be sustainable and meet all the requirements. But it's quite a challenge. And auto is so dependent on the tiers and understanding where each player is at. I think today in the auto industry, we're really pretty good at getting down to about tier 2. But when it gets past tier 2, I think it becomes more difficult to see what tier 2 is doing with tier 3 and then below. So it definitely is a challenge keeping the supply chain in order in automotive.
In manufacturing in general, obviously always has challenges regardless of the sector. I'm curious, what are you seeing as top of mind for QAD's customers right now? What are you hearing from them?
Definitely the switch from the internal combustion engine to the EV. You're hearing some suppliers are getting, or I should say our customers are getting, their programs are getting delayed, our volumes are going down. I also teach a supply chain class in the industry, and I hear that a lot in my class. The other thing that's happening right now that I am worried a little bit about is these sustainability requirements. Like I mentioned before, these Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, where we have to start making sure, our manufacturing facilities are friendly to the environment and to their people, and our suppliers are. And when I teach the supply chain class, I have people in the manufacturing in the class, supply chain managers, quality managers. And when I ask them about these sustainability requirements, sometimes I feel like it's a deer in the headlights. So while there's a lot of talk about it, I would really caution people, executives, to say, has that message really gotten down to the plant yet? Do they really understand this and how to look for these initiatives? Because I don't see it. So I'm explaining it in class that you have to start making sure that, in the plant facility from a manufacturing and a supply chain perspective, really embracing lean again, bringing lean back up, and make sure you're really doing it to eliminate waste within the facilities, but then digging down into your suppliers, letting them know they got to do the same thing, and they got to tell their suppliers they need to do the same thing. So that's some of the challenge that I see there. And then the last one that I think is really big, and I'm sure it's not a surprise to you, there's been so many disruptions. So the supply chain, really suffers in performance sometimes, due to these challenges with risk. And so those are the areas that I see that are on our customers' mind a lot, to really, how do we address these areas? There's many challenges, but I'd say those are the top 3 I hear the most.
Yeah. And I mean, back to what you had mentioned earlier about, because, we talked about the switch from EVs into ICE and how that could affect parts. And I think you had a really good point that, cars are still going to have doors. They're still going to have instrument panels and things like that. But the demand, that can't really be helped by any of the companies. And I've gotten the impression really that demand has dropped, not just for EVs, but for vehicles in general. It almost seems like we kind of rode this wave like post-pandemic, or at least in the United States, where people were buying vehicles, and it's kind of worn off. Do you see that maybe like we're kind of in a little bit lull and it'll pick back up, or is it a little bit more grave than that?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I remember, gosh, it might be like, I'm guessing off the top of my mind, like 8 years or so ago, we were like so excited we were going to hit, 100 million units globally in the supply chain, and then it started to, we had, a couple crises and it volumes dropped. And then we thought with the EV and the potentially autonomous vehicles, it would drop again. And it's just kind of lulled. And now we're back to that 100 million units again, worldwide. So I'd say it's stagnant right now a little bit. Again, it's projected to pick back up again, I think. But I really, beyond 100 million units, I'm not sure it's ever going to get beyond that. And it might even dip a little bit lower at some point in time. But I see it hanging out at 100 million units, but that could even be, several years out. So I think you're absolutely correct in what you're seeing, a little bit of slowdown in general. I think the elections have a lot to do with it. I think once that becomes clear, it'll make a big difference and people will know. And then that's typical when people feel comfortable about the economy or about spending, or they don't. It depends on which way it goes. But yeah.
They at least have an answer.
Yeah. And I know I can even see in our customer base, it's like everybody's saying they're waiting for the election to be over so that some decisions can be made. Yeah. And they're even curious about their customers. They think after the election, it'll become clear. But right now, I just think a lot of people aren't getting a lot of answers because we're just waiting and seeing what's going to happen.
One other thing you mentioned there, autonomous vehicles, is that's another thing that similar to EVs, at least from my perspective, like it was something like 10, 15 years ago. We're all going to be riding around in autonomous vehicles in 5-10 years. And that's been another thing that's really kind of slowed down. Like, yes, there's taxis driving around certain, cordoned off areas or whatever you want to call it. But I mean, it's something it's more, I assume maybe affects the supply chain more just with all the sensors and radars and the advanced technology. But I don't think, we're going to be seeing as big of an impact maybe on, with autonomous vehicles as we had expected in the recent past. I mean, I just want to get your thoughts on that.
I'm in complete agreement. I think before COVID, you heard a lot about autonomous vehicles, but I really, when I go to various industry conferences, I hear very little about autonomous vehicles. I know Tesla just recently came out with something, but in general, that has really stalled. I think some OEMs, and it makes a lot of sense, through getting more and more safety in the vehicle, and as we add more software in the car, that eventually it'll just maybe naturally get us there. But I don't think it's a goal like it once was in the industry. I just don't hear about it that much at all anymore. It's really gone quiet compared to what it was pre-COVID. But I think COVID, it stopped spending. People didn't have the pockets that they had, right? You got to cut somewhere. So they stayed in EV. And, we've gone through a lot in the last 5 years with EV. So I just don't see the autonomous vehicles picking up back up, at least I can see any place in the near future. But Tesla just had the announcement, but I don't see a lot other than that.
Your work with the Automotive Standards Committee seems relevant to all manufacturers. So how could someone keep pace with your work there? Get the latest on what you've been up to?
Yes, like I had mentioned, I have a podcast called Auto Supply Chain Profits. My co-host is Jan Griffiths. She used to be a VP of supply chain at a major tier 1 supplier and left to, she also does another podcast on her own about authentic leadership because it's a real passion of hers. But together, her and I are really big advocates of breaking down silos in organization, especially when it comes to quality, supply chain, IT, and now sustainability. So what we see is they don't work together. And when they don't work together, it not only causes problems within the organization, but it causes dissatisfaction with your suppliers because I may get hit up for something in your quality department, purchasing may tell me something else, supply chain may tell me something else. There's not just this a collaborative front. And those like Toyota and even General Motors and Honda who are working more towards, we're going to have from engineering to the time we manufacture, we're going to work more together and collaborate and break down silos. We see that that's really working. But we really focus on quality and supply chain and how that can really help to improve your organization. We came up with these 24 essential supply chain processes. And they've actually been adopted by the industry. And within these, there's business planning, program planning, operational control, and performance. So there's 24 processes that come under those 5 categories. And so our podcast is talking about those on different episodes. We have typically IT to the C-level on our show. They can be from OEMs, tier ones, industry, thought leaders, all come on our show. We'd like to talk a lot about what are the challenges and get people talking about some of these solutions. We're really trying to break down these silos and just get the conversation going, trying to get people away from the old command and control type leadership that you would see in the automotive industry to more really encouraging collaboration internally and then again with suppliers. We're about on our 70th episode and we've got about 9,000 downloads and we're in 21 countries. So we're really excited about the success that we've had to date.
Awesome. Very cool. And incidentally, it's Auto Supply Chain Profits, and profits is PROPHETS.
Yes. It's kind of a play on word, but in this case, if you're looking for it, it might cause a problem because there's the other type of profits as well, too. Yes, but it's the seer profits, yes.
Excellent. Well, hey, Terry, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. It was great talking with you.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Oh, and if listeners want to learn more about QAD, where should they go for that information?
They can go to QAD.com and they can reach out to us on our website. That's easy to do. Or you can go on my podcast. I've got information there how you can connect to me and I can get them to the right person as well.
Excellent. And to stay up to date about what's happening in manufacturing today and to hear more podcasts, visit us at advancedmanufacturing.org.